Let me just explain who I am. I'm a consultant in biometrics and fintech space. I've been in the biometrics industry for about 8 years now. I consult with banks, fintech startups, anyone that's getting interested now in the biometric space. And I basically help them with their business strategy from a global point of view and how they develop this tech and how they roll it out. I'm currently assisting a new fintech company based in the US called FaceTech. I will tell you a little bit about them in the presentation as it comes up. I started a LinkedIn group called Biometrics for e-commerce. This was started in 2011. I thought that I would get about 500 members to this to explain a little bit about the biometrics market, and it's now grown to around 23,000 members, and you're welcome to join this group as well. Okay, should we hit one more? So, biometrics. Who's heard of biometrics, first of all? Sure, okay, good. Next one now. So, what we're seeing in the biometric space is that it's been rolled out into many different verticals, and I'm sure you're aware that smartphones in particular have endorsed biometrics with regard to a simple login, being able to open up your phone instead of using your username, password or PIN. Another key area where biometrics is being used is obviously at airports with airport security, using your biometric passport to identify you, as well as using it for e-gates. Many countries have adopted what they call frictionless biometrics, and that is being able to walk through the terminal, be recognized by facial recognition, and you can actually onboard an aircraft as long as the system recognizes you. This is being piloted in a few countries right now. In particular, Australia are experimenting with this, and we all have had bad experiences with airports and queues, and this is becoming an issue because more passengers, more travel is obviously happening, and this is primarily where I think we're going to see biometrics taking a strong lead. There are other areas on here. It's creeping into healthcare, education, vehicles, autonomous vehicles as well, whereby, you know, as a driver, you'll be able to access the system by using your fingerprint or your face, and they're experimenting with these types of cars in all places, Las Vegas right now, and it's been rolled out again in certain areas. Wearables is another strong area, and I'm sure some of you are using wearables for maybe health reasons or maybe for jogging or all these kind of areas, whereby capturing your heart rate and this kind of data is being used for that, as well as accessing the tube. All these kind of areas are wearable. You can go through on certain gates with a ring on your finger, and that again is going to be more prevalent as well. I guess we're going to have to switch another slide. So I'm going to talk one particular area of where biometrics is really being rolled out again, and it's particularly in digital banking. You may recognize some of these banks. These are the top 50 digital-only banks in the market right now. What's their difference? Why are they gaining ground in this area? Well, the investment in these banks is quite significant, and some of these brands you will recognize, some you won't because they're in different markets. So Oak North is not so well known, particularly with regard to the likes of Monzo. I'm sure you've come across Revolut. Who's got accounts with some of these brands up here? Stands to reason. Some of the banks, Tandem, have got significant investment. Chime is a US company. The second one there is based in Brazil, and it's doing phenomenal business in terms of rolling out their mobile-only bank and using just a simple Touch ID on their phone. Okay, let's go again. So why? What's happening here? And you probably won't come as any particular surprise here is to see how consumer trends are changing from the traditional branch banking and telephone banking that we've been used to 10 years ago. The shift is all going mobile. Mobile banking is becoming very, very prevalent. Okay. So by the next couple of years, we're going to see nearly 2 billion people using a biometric component as part of their credentials when opening up either their bank account or doing transfers and so on. Some of you might be doing this already today, but this number is quite phenomenal when you look at the number of people that are unbanked in the world and don't have digital identity. So obviously in the predominant markets, USA, Europe, and particularly in Asia, you're starting to see a very strong take-up of biometric technology. We'll have to go again, Cam. Okay, we're going to have to put these all down, yeah. Okay, so certainly in the next couple of years, we are going to see mobile banking overtake all other forms of banking, in particular, telephone and online. That is the way the trend is moving. These statistics from UK Finance found that 22 million customers were currently using their phones to just access their current bank accounts, doing limited transactions without the necessary risk. But it's certainly, as you can see, more popular with millennials. That age group is very much in. Do you want to come through? In particular, you're starting to see these millennials, with obviously with smartphones, with tablets, being able to enjoy the experiences of mobile banking. And if you have a legacy account, let's say, the HSBCs, the Barclays, the Santanders, the Lloyds, the RBSs in the UK, they are trying their best to catch up because they have focused on their traditional branch banking, and there's a statistic in the UK at the moment that around 50 banks per week are closing their branches because of the competition from the digital-only banks that they weren't worried about nearly 5 years ago. Well, they're worried about them now. So what can they do? They're starting to look at their mobile offering with their banking, and they're trying to make the whole process a lot more easy and frictionless when it comes to logging in. And you'll also start to see the Z generation start to take this up as well in this particular area. Okay, let's switch again. So here's just an interesting perspective of a chart where you're starting to see, obviously, millennials take it up again. So who's driving this? Well, certainly Apple, when they launched iPhone 4 in 2014, the first time they launched a biometric, a Touch ID, was really one of the driving forces into the consumer market, making people aware of how easy it was to open up their phone or make a payment with Apple Pay. And now Apple have decided they're going to abandon the fingerprint completely. And they see Face ID as being prevalent. And probably over the next few years as well, facial recognition will become the standard, the go-to application for digital identity. Okay. And particularly in the tech market, you are seeing all devices have a biometric component, and certainly over the next couple of years, every single device that will come out will have some form of biometric enablement. Okay, it's a bit strange. Here's a bit of boring stuff now. Only a couple of slides. I could have talked about this for another hour, but what you're seeing in the EU is that, you can bring it all down actually now, Cam. What you're seeing in the EU is regulation coming into play, something called PSD2, which is the Payment Services Directive. GDPR, you probably have heard about. It's the General Data Protection Act, and the Anti-Money Laundering Act as well. but in particular with regard to payments, which affects everybody in this room. Now there's going to be something called strong customer authentication. This is coming into force and will be law in September next year. It will mean that all banks, all e-commerce companies, retailers will have to comply with these EU rules. It doesn't matter about Brexit, has no impact on this standard because it doesn't matter where the payment originates. If the one leg is in the EU, this has to be adopted, strong customer authentication. What that means, two-factor authentication. You've heard of two-factor authentication? So it's combining a minimum of two factors into a payment process to verify who you are in a payment transaction. There are certain exemptions. For example, contactless payments will not fall under this remit, but the majority of payments that you do online or on your phone will go through this process. And you think, well, crikey, there's going to be a lot of friction here. How am I going to get my shopping done and so on? But going through this process, there are just two of these items that are needed for strong customer authentication. This means that something you know is a knowledge-based thing. This is something you're probably using already, a PIN, password, a secret, any of these kind of knowledge-based things. That has to be independent of something you own. The possession factor relates to like your smartphone, your tablet, your device. Or it can also mean your bank card as well. And you're starting to see biometric cards come out. MasterCard are experimenting again with biometrics instead of a PIN number, because it's just easy to hold your thumb on top of the card and do a contactless payment that way. And the other area, of course, is what I'm here to talk about, is inherent biometrics. These elements have to be independent. One can't breach the other. And if it does, there are some serious fines when it comes to the banks themselves. So they're all in a race to get this done by September. I won't tell you about the RTS. That's kind of the technical standards that form the basis of this implementation. And the FCA have laid down the ground rules for this implementation. This does affect tech companies, by the way, I have to tell you, because the FCA have to vet these kind of techs as well. I'll come on a little bit about that later if we move on again. So the process of dynamic linking between those different modalities with an inherent code that is positioned in the transaction, and this happens automatically as the process. Now you're probably thinking, Jesus, I've got to do this every time I buy a coffee. No, it's not that difficult to do a selfie, for example, if you're doing something online with your phone or with your desktop, along with the device that you have. Let's move on again, sorry Cam. Let's talk about what you are in terms of inheritance. So biometrics themselves fall into two categories. The physical side that you are, and the behavioral side, and behavioral biometrics are starting to also play a huge role in your session online. And you may not be aware that your session is being monitored and you're wondering, why do I get all these pop-ups that are actually selling me something I might like? Well, that's because your behavior is being monitored online, and when you click cookies and click your GDPR statement, that's where behavioral is actually starting to understand what kind of things you're doing, what you're looking at, kind of web pages you're going into. And so behavioral is quite important because it's passive. The majority of physical biometrics require a task. So selfie requires you to do something. Fingerprint requires you to do something. New technologies like palm and vein technologies are coming through as well. You know about iris. Down the road, will we see DNA as being a way of your digital identity and your credentials, we'll have to see. Okie dokie. So these are kind of what the trends were last year. Face really only made up about 7%. It's kind of increased to around 10%. But certainly, predominantly the number of people that are using smartphones today still have iPhones with Touch ID. So who's using a biometric component on their phone to log in? So using a fingerprint. Anybody using, got iPhone 10? Who's using iPhone 10? So you are quite used to using your face to log into your phone, or maybe you just prefer the PIN. However, this is kind of where the market has been. It hasn't really changed a great deal at the moment. Face still isn't kind of getting that traction. Apple are pushing it, Samsung are pushing it from the tech perspectives, but the banks are going to rely on it because it's probably the most reliable of the biometrics, apart from iris. Iris is the strongest, but there is not the hardware in the market to really capture the data and the signals that are needed for iris, so face is probably the next best thing. Okay. This was a survey by Jumia. Sorry, scared you there. So you're starting there to see biometrics play a significant role in financial services and obviously mobile access. Probably going to go through these a little bit quicker now. So what are the challenges? So it's not 100% science. It's a probability. You know that a password is either right or it's wrong. A biometric relies on probabilities. Is that you? That's definitely you. And there are issues around biometric technologies for, in particular, banks to rely on, particularly because fingerprint is held on the device. They don't actually know that's you. They know that that device belongs to you, but they're not sure about that fingerprint. The bank tells you only to register one fingerprint for your bank account, but of course our kids are on our phones all the time and they've registered their fingerprints too. So there are vulnerabilities with fingers. Obviously we've all experienced these kind of situations where our fingers are too dry. We can't get into our phone, we get frustrated. There are conditions in that kind of thing. The identification area in terms of the space captured on your phone is very, very small and minute. Can that be compromised? Well, it's been proved that it can. A latent print can be pulled from the phone and it can actually get into a person's phone. Many hackers have done it. It's very simple to do. The vulnerabilities and conditions that affect voice, if you're in a very noisy area, it's very difficult to log into your bank account and say my voice is my password. So there are issues around voice. It's not as reliable because it can be mimicked. And that's also been hacked as well. There was a couple of BBC twins from Click that managed to hack into each other's account simply by their voice. They did actually have 8 goes before they were able to get in. That was mainly the bank's fault for not actually challenging them maybe after 2 or 3, but nevertheless it does have vulnerabilities. Face suffers from these things as well. If it's too bright, if there's too much sunshine, even the iPhone 10 suffers in bright sunshine to actually take a 3D map of your face. And if it's too dark, some facial recognition systems also are vulnerable in those situations too. The other thing about face, and I'll talk about face because that's my specialist area, is that face can be spoofed. The last few technologies that have been on the market have shown that photos, video playbacks, masks, AI and 3D models have all proved that they can get into an account by simply one of those methods. We can move on as well. And again, so something I'm going to talk about, spoofing. Are you aware what spoofing is? Yes. So impersonating somebody, it shows that spoofing was really came to the fore about a year ago, simply because tech companies had developed this technology. It was all well and good doing a selfie, but actually, how do we know that's really you? How do we prove it? And so spoofing technology started to come onto the market. Liveness detection is one particular area as well. Okay, so photographs were quite easily to get past systems. And again, sorry, and again. And your typical fraudster knows this. When I say typical, the most sophisticated fraudsters use the dark web in order to gain all the information that they need to do to hack, not just hack accounts, but actually work out how to get past certain systems. Okay, let's go again. I'm going to play you a video now and show you how easy this is to spoof. And this is all you need doing. This was done in about a minute.
First, I'm going to load the picture that we're going to be using for our model. Then we adjust the control points over here, just like the example shows, and it's going to generate a basic mesh. So on this step, we can spend as much time as we want adjusting all these control points to be as accurate as possible, adjusting it to our picture. We're going to keep it simple and just make some very simple corrections, and our model is going to be ready to go. But you can spend more time if you like, and you're going to get a more realistic result. Once you're ready, just click next. Adjust the orientation of your picture. Now we can start animating it if we want. So for example, if I want to import a talking animation, and the software already has many examples that are
have we lost it?
Provided to us.
Yeah.
We can just load it and our model is ready to go and it's talking. Another example of what we can do is control it real time. So for example, I can move my mouse and it will make the model look around, and I can click and it will blink. You could imagine that for liveness technologies that use this type of indicator, whether the subject is blinking or smiling or looking around, I could be just holding my phone right here, moving my mouse, and responding to whatever the software asks me to do.
So as you can see, it's pretty easy to do. Fraudsters know this, and they are able to do this in onboarding processes. I'll talk about that in a minute. If we've got time, I'm conscious of the time. Another 5 minutes or so?
Yeah.
Okay, let's move on, Cam. So I'm going to talk about this company because I'm now representing them here in the UK. There aren't many biometric companies that have solved the spoofing issue. It's very, very difficult. It's difficult tech. So the only way biometric companies have been able to do this is to get third-party testing done by a lab like NIST, which is an approved lab run by the US government and the DHS as well. And they have lots of different labs related to them. One is IBETA, which you can see here. And this company has actually gone through a vigorous test over the last year to build technology that is basically a liveness check that stops all kinds of spoofing. It went through 1,500 different spoofing attempts. It never failed once. And it's become very clever. And this is the standard now that biometric companies are trying to get to make sure that your credentials are safe. Okay, we can move on. So I'm not going to talk about this too much because who's into the blockchain space here?
Everyone.
Yes, everyone. Yeah, okay, figured. Okay, well, I don't need to tell you any of this then, really, but certainly when it comes to digital identity, blockchain is becoming quite prevalent and sitting alongside the biometric technology. There is a place for blockchain in the digital identity space. There is no question that looking at the more secure channels of the way blockchain operates, this is going to be the future. So I think you're all in the right space. Think about how and what you have to understand as well, and as you're all nice and young in here, I can see, is that when you talk to commercial companies, their understanding of biometrics is quite limited, let alone understanding what blockchain can do. And you have a lot of stakeholders in these billion-dollar banks that really can't get their heads around this. And what I've been doing is consulting with a lot of banks to kind of get across why they need to think about it. All this new tech is all coming down the stream. So it's certainly becoming more and more prevalent when it comes to digital identity and having a more central repository camp, because we can move on here. And I'll probably move on here, but the only statistic here is there's still over 1 billion people in the world that do not have any form of official identity themselves. And I think blockchain has a goal here to reach out to the unbanked people of the world, because the Western world, for sure, we are online all the time, we're connected to everything. So let's move on, skip this one, because this will be in my presentation, which you can have. You can email me or talk to Cam about having this as well. Again, so passwords. Aren't we fed up with passwords? I mean, we have to have so many passwords for so many things. We're supposed to change them regularly. We don't. We use the same ones. We use variations of the same ones. We forget them. It's all the usual friction. It's last century's technology. Still in play today. If you open up a bank account with any of the top 5 banks, you've got to create a password. You've got to create 2 or 3 secret questions. If you don't write them down, you've forgotten them. So password resets are a major issue. So both biometrics and blockchain has a role here. We want to get rid of passwords. Passwords have been dead. We're just reluctant to kind of move on. Okay? And they're problematic, as you can see. They cost companies a fortune to maintain. The average percentage to a call center to reinstate your account is around 20-25% of the company's costs. Replace that with your face, your fingerprint, or something that you're never going to forget. You are the password. It becomes an issue to companies to maintain the password technology. Okay, we can move on. The other area, of course, is we're familiar with data breaches all over the place. Our data is out there on the dark web for sale. It used to be quite expensive to get your credentials. Now it's easy, getting your username, passwords to certain things, credit card details. It's all out there. I was speaking to an expert who dealt with the Chinese market, and he said, Steve, he said, don't worry, they just haven't got round to you. They've got your details, but they haven't got round to you, so feel lucky. And that's the situation. All our details are out there. We're in the connected world. There are so many incidences that we've got accounts with. If you've got Instagram, if you've got Facebook, if you've got all these social media accounts, they've all been hacked. They've all been hacked. Your details are out there. So how can we protect ourselves in the future? Using yourself as a credential is probably one of the ways. Okay, just quickly about onboarding. Onboarding, when you set up a Monzo account, for example, you'll go through this easy process of them capturing your passport. You go through a selfie process. You then go off to a KYC where they check your credentials with third-party organizations, and then your account is approved. We can move on here. Now, that's a typical photograph of a passport that you would take, that Monzo would take. This is a fraud passport. Think about how easy that looks from the point of view, that doesn't cost much to do. And so fraudsters know this. When they use that, they can AI the face model, they can clean it up, they can then go through the onboarding process of a passport, capture a selfie, animate the selfie, and set up an account. Now, all these brands that you saw, they're all being hit by fraud, tons of it. Yeah, how can that be protected more and more? So going back to the company I was talking about, liveness detection, proving that that is a photograph, that is an animated AI model that is being used to portray a video of you. In Monzo, you have to nod your head left, right. The technology companies that sit behind these big companies are racing to get more done in this situation. One company has addressed it, and that is Junmio. Jumio have looked at liveness technology. They've integrated FaceTech into this process, and so far they've not had one incident of onboarding fraud. And this is a signal that they are trying to clean up the security elements of onboarding. So, okay, here we go. I think time's up roughly. I've got 5?
You've got 5 minutes including Q&A, so let's...
Okay, so yeah, I've more or less come to the end. So really here it stands the reason why banks are thinking about deploying biometrics in terms of it's going to increase the customer engagement. The brand is going to look better, it's going to reduce its costs, it's going to increase its security elements around its protocols and so on. So I could expand a bit more on that, but I'm going to leave some time for some questions. I did have a nice video at the end of this, but I'll leave it in the presentation, which you can all enjoy at a later date. Okay, next one. You want the video now?
How long is it?
It's about 5 minutes. Here's your typical online user.
Okay guys, I think I'm actually going to call it that. Unfortunately, yeah. I'd love to watch this clip, but actually...
It's on the presentation.
Can we open up some questions, please? Obviously, there you go. There you go, sir.
So the people in this room would generally say that the solution to authentication is public key cryptography, which is basically the basis of all the blockchain. So is that are you saying biometrics are have something superior to that, or are complementary to it?
Complementary.
How does it fit into blockchain? I'm trying to understand how us as blockchain people should actually, what we should be taking away from this talk.
Well, it's a component of the process, so it adds to the security of the public and private keys which are issued on a device, for example.
Yeah, I mean, the obvious one is obviously, so I need to protect my private keys so that if I want to generate a signature, I need to authenticate to my own device, so it's kind of self-sovereign. We would have something which you would call self-sovereign.
Self-sovereign, right.
As opposed to the bank having my face. I don't want the bank to have my face. I'm okay maybe with my device having my face. Is that the kind of technology that you are pushing, or is it more around the bank having a copy of your face?
Well, I'm an advocate of biometrics, so if it's pushing it into the self-sovereign area, and it does work in certain markets for that, for sure. It's a good opportunity, but it's not the only thing, because there's regulation connected to this technology as well. Self-sovereign might work in some markets, but in markets which are not regulated, there could be issues with understanding how that's regulated, who's holding those components. When you say self-sovereign, you know, where are your credentials actually held? They're held on the blockchain. Can the blockchain be compromised? Well, I've heard it can.
No, your credentials are held on your device.
Well, if they're held on the device, your device certainly can be compromised.
Actually, once it's been compromised, which is Bitcoin over...
I can't hear you, sorry. Have you got...
Sorry, we're going to keep it very nice and brief. We've got one more question and then we're going to
Okay.
move on.
So I believe in 2010, Bitcoin was actually not really hacked, but it was the blockchain network was hacked by the overflown bug, which created billions and billions. This potentially didn't make anybody lose their keys, but it allowed some attacks in a way, if it happened, but it was soft fault.
Okay, we're going to move straight on. Last question.
A little bit morbid. If we're all locking our private keys with biometrics, how does biometrics work when people are dead?
Well, liveness does have an issue. I mean, you know, it's like the law enforcement trying to break into it as well. You know, when a citizen doesn't give their permission to use their biometrics, it's the same thing. It's as I said at the start of the talk, we're not talking about perfect science. We're talking about this technology coming into play for convenience of the consumer. The biggest bugbear is passwords, that it's trying to get past in terms of all our accounts that we have right now. Why can't you just use your fingerprint, face and voice? That can be on the device, that can be stored in the cloud, or it can be, in the case of bank, on their servers where they need to identify you in that. Dead people, actually the technology that FaceTech developed was tested with dead people, and even dead people did not break the system. So they used everything from corpses and so on.
So that's a bad thing, right? We have to really
A dead person should not be able to authenticate.
Yeah,
Right?
I think.
in that case, you have to really watch out where you put your private keys.
Absolutely.
Awesome. Okay, guys, we're
2
going to
or
round of
3,
applause to Steve
multi-sig.
Cook there.
Sorry, I couldn't play your video for you, but it's on my presentation.